Hello there, welcome to Really Good Crochet. My name's Ali and welcome to your first introduction to crochet lesson. Today we're going to be covering the basic tools that you'll be using. We're going to be covering some of the very basic techniques that you need to get started and a couple of the basic stitches. That's the single crochet and the half double crochet, but we'll get there. We like to take our time around here, so pull up with your favourite brew. Make sure that you're nice and comfy. Make sure that you have a notebook to hand in case you'd like to take some notes, and we'll get started. Now, I've got a selection of some of the essential tools here in front of me. Mostly they're hooks. They're a selection of different hook types and sizes. And I'm going to take you through those in just a minute. But before I do that, just a couple of things. My job as your crochet teacher is not to tell you that there's only one way to do something. My job as your crochet teacher is not to tell you that there's only one style that you should crochet in. My job as your crochet teacher is to give you the basic techniques, the basic guardrails whilst you're learning that you need to have around you whilst you're learning, so that you can find the techniques that work for you, so that you can find your style of crochet that you enjoy, so that once you have produced a finished project, you can look at that with pride and say, I made that, and be happy with it. You might like your stitches to be tall and bouncy and floppy. You might like your stitches to be neat and compact. You might like to use muted shades and vintage patterns. Or you might like to use bright colours and do lots of aragorumi. Whatever it is that you're going to enjoy making, my job is to make sure that you've got the basics that you need to get started and to find what works for you and to find your crochet joy. So if you have any questions at all, at any point whatsoever, please make sure to drop them in the comments and I will respond to them as quickly as I possibly can. Now, I am based in the UK, but I do use US stitch turns. There is a difference between US stitch turns and UK stitch turns. I will go through those slowly. So make sure that you do have a notebook and a pen to hand when we get to that point, although there's not too much of that in this lesson. So let's have a look at some of the basic tools that you need to get started. So first of all, we've got some crochet hooks here. We'll look at these two first of all. This one is a clover. It's the Clover Soft Touch. It's probably my favourite hook, my favourite type of hook to use. I've got a full set of these. I do have quite small hands, and whether I am holding my hook like this, which I do when I am doing a lot of slip stitching or a lot of back loop stitching with small stitches, or whether I'm holding my hook like this, I find that especially for the bigger, longer projects, that this is very often the most comfortable hook for me to use. that's because I have a smaller hand. If you have a slightly larger hand, you might find that this type of hook is too short for you. This is also a style of hook that Clover make, but it's not a Clover hook. But they do make ones that look exactly like this. Again, I do enjoy using these hooks as well. The type of hooks that I get, one of the things that is common to all of them is that they are inline hooks, which means that they have very pointy heads, nice pointy heads. I think you should be able to see the nice pointy heads there and there, which means that they can get right under a stitch if there's a tight stitch or something, and they can, that nice well there means that they can really grab onto the yarn. So there are hooks that have rounded heads, but I don't have any of those because I don't enjoy using those hooks. I don't feel that the style of crochet, my style of crochet, works well with those styles of hooks. So I don't have any of those styles of hooks. Now, it might be that your style of crochet will work better with a hook that has a more rounded head. So that's something that you can look into. Now, this hook here is a pony. Similarly to the other hooks, it's an inline hook, so it has that nice pointy head and a nice deep well. And there's also that thumb rest there. I do use this sometimes. Sometimes I do find that this one is quite handy. I think of this as a bit of a workhorse hook. So if it's a big blanket project that I'm working on, with the appropriate size yarn, of course, then this is sometimes the hook that I will. This is the hook that I will reach for when it's a big blanket project, because I find that this tends to be the hook that I will be able to work with most comfortably for longer periods of time. Now, the difference between, let me just get these out of the way, all of these hooks is the size. This is a 4.5mm hook. This is a 4mm hook. This is a 3mm hook. No, that's a 3.5mm hook, and this is a 3mm hook. Now, all of these hooks you can possibly use with the yarn that we're going to be working with in just a minute. Again, it depends upon a number of things, such as your style and the particular yarn that you're working with. One of the things when it comes to yarn is that whilst there are specific weights of yarn, so you have 2-ply and 3-ply yarn, which is sometimes referred to as lace weight yarn, and then you have 4-ply yarn or sock weight yarn. Then you do have in between that, you have 6-ply yarn, but that is not as commonly found. And then there is the D, which is what we're going to be using in a minute. There is DK weight yarn or 3-weight yarn, which is 8 plies of yarn spun together for the strand. One of the reasons why sometimes, although generally speaking it will be a 4mm hook that's recommended, Sometimes the yarn will be a bit puffier and you can use a 4.5mm, and you might want to use a 4.5mm. Sometimes the yarn will be a little bit finer, despite being a DK weight yarn, and you might want to use a 3.5mm. Sometimes it will be about average, but because you like your stitches to be neat and relatively compact, you'll use either the 3.5 or possibly even a 3mm yarn in order to achieve that neat compact effect that you like for a particular pattern, such as for a granny square, for example. So you'll have different hooks. So whilst there will be a recommended hook size, once you're comfortable with using the recommended hook size, and once you've started using different types of yarn within that yarn weight, then you can start experimenting, if you would like to, with different hook sizes within that range. So it within about 1mm to 0.5mm either side of the 4mm, and that will apply the same to each of the weights of yarn. So there will be a recommended hook size for the sock weight yarn, which is generally 3mm, and a recommended hook size for the lace weight yarn, which is generally 2mm, and a recommended hook size for the Aran weight yarn, which is a 4 weight yarn, and that's generally 5mm or 5.5mm. Then there's also the bulkier weight yarns, such as in the UK they're usually referred to as chunky or super chunky. In the US they will be referred to as a bulky weight of 5. But then you would be looking at using a hook size of like a 7 or 8 or possibly even a 9mm. Because of the type of nerve damage that I have, the Aran weight yarn is the bulkiest weight yarn that I use, because anything more than that, and I tend to find that it can get very painful very quickly. So I work with all of the weights of yarn up to and including an Aran weight of yarn. Sometimes I wish I could use a bulkier weight yarn, but unfortunately I physically can't manage it because it causes too much pain. So today we're going to be using DK weight yarn. We're going to start with this lovely colourful one here, and that's what we're going to start with learning some of the basic techniques, and then we'll use this cream one afterwards for one of the stitches. Now let me just going to use that. A couple of the other tools that you need to use and that you always need to have on hand. You need to have on hand large eye embroidery darning needles for sewing your ends in. Not the funnest part of any project, but nevertheless a necessary part of any project. And stitch markers. You will need to get used to using stitch markers. One of the best pieces of advice that I can give you is right from the get-go, get used to using stitch markers. They will help you whilst you're learning to see your stitches. And even once you're seeing your stitches, nevertheless, these are tools that you should use on a regular basis because they can help to avoid totally avoidable disasters. Trust me. Right. Here's also another little tip that I've found. I do not use a yarn bowl, or at least I don't at the moment. I use an old, clean cereal bowl as my yarn bowl. It works just as well as any yarn bowl, and I didn't have to pay any extra for it. And as long as I keep it clean, it's not a problem. Right. Now, it doesn't matter if you've got something chunkier than a DK weight yarn, because everything I'm going to show you now is going to be the same regardless of whether or not you've got DK weight yarn and a 4mm hook, or whether you've got Aran weight yarn and a 5mm hook. It doesn't matter. But since I've got DK weight yarn, I'm going to use the 4mm hook today. Now, the first thing that you're going to need to learn to do is you're going to need to make a slip stitch. Let me just show you how I make mine. One of the glorious things about crochet is that there are many ways to do every single thing pretty much in crochet. So whilst I'm going to show you how I make my slip stitch, that doesn't mean to say that this is the only way to make a slip stitch to put onto your hook. Your finger. There's your finger. You have your working end of yarn. That's the yarn that's coming from the ball or the skein of yarn. And then you have your short end, your cut end here. You're going to take your short end and you're going to wrap it over. This is the front of your finger. This is the back of your finger. So you take your short end of yarn and wrap it over from front to back of your finger once, and then from front to back of your finger a second time, so that you have 2 loops on your finger, and you have a little tail hanging down under your finger that you can hold between your thumb and your second finger. Now, you've got the front loop here, and you've got the back loop here. You're going to take the back loop and pull it up over the front loop, and then you're going to take that loop that was the front loop and pull it all the way over your finger. So now you have a slip stitch that you can pop onto your hook like that. Let me just do that again. So you take your cut end of yarn and you wrap it from front to back over your finger once, then over your finger a second time, so that you've got a little tail hanging down under your finger that you can hold between your thumb and your second finger. You've got 2 loops on your finger there. You've got the front loop here and the back loop there. You're going to take the back loop and pull it over the front loop. Then you're going to take the front loop and pull it all the way over your finger like that. Lift up your finger, pop your hook into the loop, and you don't want to tighten it down too hard because you want to have freedom of movement of the yarn. Okay? Now, before we go any further, I'm just going to hold the hook up like this so that the hook part is facing you. Just so that we have fully defined terms, this is where my finger is now, is the back of the hook. And that's the front of the hook. That may seem obvious to some, but that does need to be defined. So where the hook is the front of the hook, and that, where my finger is now, is the back of the hook. You've got the short end. Make sure that that's off to your right. If you're left-handed, that works the other way around. There is no right way to hold your yarn. There is no right way to hold your hook. You will need to experiment to see what works best for you. For some people, you'll find that putting your hand over your hook like this, with your thumb like that, so that you can control the hook, is the most comfortable way. And then holding your yarn, sorry, dog is happening off stage left, she's just been fed, over your forefinger for tension. Now, my forefinger is shorter than the rest of my fingers by just a little bit, so I actually hold my yarn over my second finger like that. Some people also like to wrap it over their little fingers first, but find what works best for you. I will mostly hold my finger like my hook like a pen. That is mostly how I will hold my hook. Sometimes I will hold it like that. Mostly I will hold it like that. I'm flexible. It's fine. Just find what works best for you. Okay? So, once you've had a play and found what works best for you, we're going to learn how to make a chain. So, we're going to start by wrapping the working end of the yarn from just 1 minute. Can we get you any closer? Oh yeah, we can definitely get you closer. Look, there we go. Wrap the working end of the yarn from back to front. Grab the yarn and pull through. Let's do that again. Wrap the yarn from back to front, grab the yarn, and pull through. And that's another chain. Wrap the yarn from back to front, grab the yarn, and pull through. Wrap the yarn from back to front, grab the yarn. Oh, let me try that again. And pull through. Wrap the yarn from back to front, grab the yarn, and pull through. I'm going to do that a few more times. Nice and slowly. Now take your time, practice. Pause and come back. Don't feel like you have to try and keep up. If you feel like you have to use the settings function to slow me down, then slow me down. And then once you feel like you know what you're doing with this, with making a chain, come back and we'll make single crochets together. Now, a single crochet in UK stitch terminology is called a double crochet. Don't ask, I have no idea how it ended up getting, I don't know. I don't know. That's just how it is. So a single crochet is called a double crochet in UK stitch terminology. So if you're in the UK and you want to use UK stitch terminology, then what we're about to learn how to do is a double crochet. If you are in the UK and you're happy to stick with US stitch terminology, then this is a single crochet. Okay, so we never count the chain that's on the hook as one of the stitches. We only count the fully formed chains hanging down from the hook. And 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 of the first chains are going to be for turning. Sometimes they will count as your first stitch, sometimes they won't. The first chain in this chain is for turning and does not count as your first stitch. Now before we start making stitches, let's just have a slightly closer look at the chain. Now you can see that there's a little row of V's. Let me just hang on a minute, because this will be able to show you a little bit more clearly. Now, you can either make the stitch into the top loop there, or under 2 loops like that, leaving that bottom loop unworked. Once you've got a bit more experience, you can learn how to make your stitches into the back bumps, but we'll get there, don't worry about that. For now, we're just going to work our stitches into the top of the chain, into the top of each of those chains. So it would probably be a good idea if I just very quickly count how many chains there are, because then I know how many stitches I shall have at the end. So we've got 1, 2, 3. That's good. So skip that first chain there into that second chain right there, right there. You're going to slip your hook under the top loop like that, and then you're going to grab the working yarn and pull up a loop. You've got 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over your hook, so that's from back to front, and pull through both of those loops. You will have 1 loop on your hook and 1 stitch on your chain. Now, before we go any further, let's just pop a stitch marker in there. use stitch markers, she says, and then she can't fiddle around with them. If you haven't got stitch markers, you can use hair grips or a different coloured piece of yarn. Just whatever you've got to hand. There you go. Now, your next stitch is made into this chain right here. This one. You've made your first stitch in here. So now you're making your second stitch in here. Slide your hook under the loop. Grab the working yarn and pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over your hook from back to front. Pull through both of those loops. And there's another stitch. Let's do that again. The next stitch in there. Slide your hook under that loop. Grab the working yarn. Pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over your hook and pull through 2 loops. That's 3. Under the loop, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop, yarn over your hook, pull through 2 loops. That's 4. Under the loop, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop, yarn over your hook, pull through both loops. That's 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. Last one. 10. Now, it doesn't matter how many chains you made. It doesn't matter if your first attempt you have fewer single crochets than chains made, or even more single crochets than chains made for your first attempt. That's fine. You can always unravel and start again. Once you're ready to make your second row, then you can follow along from here. So if you need to pause and go back over what we just did, do that. If you're ready to keep going, then let's do the second row. So, second row, chain 1, which does not count as a stitch, and then turn your work. Now I turn it that way. I turn it from left to right because that keeps the turning chain flush against the side there. A lot of people turn it the other way. Either way is fine. That's just the way I turn it. Now, before we go any further, you'll see along the top there all those lovely beads. Those are the tops of the stitches. And we're going to be working our stitches under both loops of those stitches. When we learn about making ribbing, you'll learn about using the back loops. And when you learn about slip stitching, you'll learn about using the back loops. But for now, you're going to be going under both loops of those stitches at the top to make the stitch. So, that first chain does not count as a stitch. That's just your turning chain to help you get your stitch up to the right height, first stitch up to the right height. Now, you're going to pop your hook under both loops of that top stitch there. Grab the working yarn, pull up a loop. You have 2 loops on your hook. Yarn over the hook, pull through 2 loops. Now before we go any further, you're going to pop a stitch marker that's it, into the top of that stitch there. so that you can see where the top of that stitch is for when we come back. Let's make the next stitch. Slide your hook under both loops, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop, yarn over the hook, 2 loops on your hook, pull through both loops. That's your single crochet, or double crochet in the UK terminology. So let's keep making those. Under both loops, grab the working yarn, 2 loops on the hook, under both loops, two loops on the hook, yarn over the hook, pull through both loops. I'm going to zoom out a little bit now. That's it. I'm going to zoom back in when we don't move up to the half double. I'm just going to keep slowly making single crochets, and then when we get to the end of the row, I'm going to show you what that looks like. Got 2 stitches left. Now, got that last stitch left, so let's take out that stitch marker. That's it. There's the 2 loops. There we go. Now let's just make sure that we still have 10 single crochet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. There we go. Ta-da! 10 single crochet. Let's do one more row. So we chain 1, which does not count as a stitch. and we turn this way because that keeps the chain flush against the work. It's just as an option to think about. And then, as before, you slip your hook under both loops, pull up a loop, there we go. Let's pop the hook stitch marker back in there. That's it. And let's make one more row with single crochet, nice and slowly. There are 2 stitches left. Take this stitch marker out. Slip your hook under both loops of that stitch. There. And that's a single crochet, or the double crochet if you're using UK stitch terminology. So let's move up to the next basic stitch, which is the half double or half treble in UK stitch terminology. Again, we're going to chain 1, keeps the work flush, keeps the chain flush against the work. Going to teach you some little tricks about using your chains at another point, but not today. Chains do not count as anything. Now, with your half double, let me just, nope, too close. That's better. Now, with your half double, you start by wrapping your yarn over your hook. Okay? Start by wrapping your yarn from back to front over your hook. Pop your hook under both loops of that stitch. Grab the working yarn and pull up a loop. You will have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over your hook and pull through all 3 loops. Like that. So, let me just pop a stitch marker in there. Take it off stage left because I am a tiny bit dyspraxic, so there we go. Got there in the end. Now we're going to do that again. Yarn over your hook. Pop your hook under both loops of the stitch. Grab the working yarn. Pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over your hook. Pull through all 3 loops. Now, for my tension, just to note, I have used a chain 1 and made a stitch in the first stitch. Some people will make a chain 2, which will count as their first half double. Check with whatever it is the tutorial is showing you at the time, because different designers and different tutorials, it will vary. For me, because I started off chaining quite tightly before I'd managed to make my tension much more flexible, but I have nevertheless found that for me personally, a chain of 1 and making the half double into the first stitch is absolutely fine. But for some people, they prefer to make a chain 2 and have that count as their first stitch. If you would prefer to do what I've done, if you come to find that that's how you prefer to do things, and you come across a pattern where it's saying chain 2 counts as your first half double and you'd rather do a chain 1, do the chain 1 and make the half double. Never be afraid to amend a pattern to suit your style of crochet. I have never, ever, ever met a pattern I can't amend yet. Not a single pattern, not a single one. I design my own anyway, and I will then go on and amend my own patterns afterwards, but just because. Just for the joy of varying things sometimes, but also because sometimes it will suit my style of crochet or my tension better to do something in a slightly different way to the way that the pattern directs. One of my aims is to make sure that you're confident enough to be able to do that. If you're finding right now that you're chaining so tightly that you're chaining one and struggling to make that first stitch, make a second chain and make the half double into the second stitch and see if that works better for you. It may be that that works better for you right now and that situation will change later on, or it may be that that is just what works better for you. This is about finding what works for you. Let's keep making those half doubles. Yarn over the hook, slide your hook under both loops of the stitch, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop. You've got 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, pull through all 3 loops. Yarn over the hook, slide your hook under both loops of the stitch, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop. You have 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, pull through all 3 loops. And we're going to keep doing that nice and slowly and at your own pace. Now, you might also find that working your stitch 1 loop at a time, because you're still a little bit tight, is helpful. If you're still a little bit tight right now, try that. Like that, like that, and like that. Right, now we're at the last stitch. So work the hook under both loops of the stitch. Same as before. And there's your final stitch. And then chain 1 and turn. And now before we go any further, I get to show you a half double crochet or the half treble crochet, depending on which terminology you prefer, from the front. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice straight away is here. Because you're pulling through 3 loops, there are 3 loops. The back one, the front one, and the bottom front one. Now, don't worry about the bottom front one today. You're not going to worry about that right now. You're just going to continue using the top 2 loops for today. But when we start practicing back loop stitch work, then we can start talking about what that looks like when you're using the back loop only of the half double and the effect that that creates. And as we go, I'm going to teach you techniques involving your turning chains that will help to keep your sides lovely and straight. I don't want you to worry right now about how straight your sides are or are not. You're still learning to get your tension right. You're still figuring things out. Don't worry about what your sides look like right now. Those aren't important at the moment whilst you're practicing. And there are tips and tricks that I can give you later on, once you're better acquainted with all the various bits. And then in the next part of the lesson, you'll be learning about the double crochet, or the treble crochet, as it's called in the UK stitch terminology. And then we're going to learn about the granny square. Because for lots of people, learning about the granny square is where it all clicks into place. So, chain 1 or chain 2 if you're finding that easier right now. And then you're either making your stitch into the first stitch if you're doing a chain 1, or the second stitch if you're doing a chain 2. Now work your hook under both loops of the stitch, just the top 2. Don't worry about that other loop right now. And make your stitch. Yarn over, slide your hook under the top 2 loops of the stitch, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop, 3 loops on your hook, yarn over the hook, pull through all 3 loops. Yarn over the hook, slide your hook under the top 2 loops of the stitch, grab the working yarn, pull up a loop, yarn over the hook, pull through all 3 loops. Then keep doing that, nice and slowly. Taking things slow will help you find your tension more easily. Don't allow yourself to feel rushed. If you want to pause me whilst you fiddle around with something, if you want to slow me down so that you can watch what I'm doing super slowly, that's absolutely fine. We like to take our time around here. Okay, one last stitch. Slip down the side of the stitch, so that's okay. I can remove that later. There we go. Now, take your time. Don't rush. Practice. Okay? I'm going to show you something very quickly, and then in the next lesson we're going to learn about the double crochet and then the granny square. Believe me, once you've learned the granny square, everything else after that will come much more easily, I promise. Now, just to show you very quickly, this cream yarn here is also double knitting yarn, but you should be able to see that it's a little bit puffier than the coloured yarn. There we go. So, If you have any questions at all, please pop them in the comments. I will answer them as quickly as I can. But otherwise, I will see you in the very next lesson. And I hope that you have a lovely time getting to know your new craft. Take care, lovely people. Bye bye.